Hey, I'm Org, and in this video I'm going to review the Japanese Tier 2 destroyer, the Umikaze. Now this destroyer is a good introduction to the stealth torpedo attacks that characterise the Japanese destroyer line, although it's not without its limitations. First, a bit about the history of the Umikaze. Like many Japanese ships of the early 20th century, the Umikaze was a response to the Russo-Japanese War. Japan won the war, but the conflict did reveal some limitations in their capabilities. One of these limitations was the size of the Japanese destroyers. Simply put, the most modern destroyers the Japanese had were too small for extended operations out at sea. The Umikazes were designed to correct this deficiency, although they were not entirely successful in filling this need. Because of the friendly relations between Japan and Britain at the time, they were able to base their design off the Royal Navy's tribal class of destroyer. Those were very modern destroyers, although the engines in particular were a bit of a double-edged sword. They were the first destroyers to use steam turbine engines, which gave them very high top speed, but also gave them a huge appetite for fuel. This problem was passed on to the Umikaze-class. The new type of engines meant that the Umikazes were very maintenance intensive, and the high fuel consumption basically relegated them to a coastal defence role, instead of the open ocean role that they had been designed for. However, they were a very useful test for later Japanese destroyer designs. Two Umikazes were built, the Umikaze and the Yamakaze. More were planned, but because of the expense of building these ships, the Japanese Navy ended up designing a much smaller and cheaper Sakura-class. Throughout the First World War, the Umikaze stayed in Japanese waters because of their fuel efficiency problems, while the much less powerful and much less seaworthy Sakura-class participated in the Battle of Tsingtao and the island occupations in the South and Central Pacific. In fact, it wouldn't be until the Umikaze class of 1919 that Japan would have a decent ocean-going destroyer. Both the Umikazes were eventually converted to minesweepers and were scrapped in the 1930s. So while in reality the Umikazes can be considered a failure, in World of Warships they are actually a very devastating opponent for low-tier players. In fact, over on Warshipstats.com, the Umikaze is the ship with the 8th highest win rate on the North American server, so obviously people are doing very well on this ship. What makes the Umikaze so successful is its torpedoes, in particular the 8km range of these, well, of its fully upgraded torpedoes. This is the longest torpedo range on any destroyer below Tier 6, and gives the Umikaze a fantastic long-range attack capability, particularly since the detection range of the Umikaze is only 5.6 kilometers. That's before you add on camo or captain skills. The torpedoes also reload fairly quickly, allowing the Umikaze to maintain pressure on its opponents. The torpedoes do have drawbacks, however. Firstly, they are very slow. They only travel at 48 knots. This means that it will take a very long time for the torpedo to travel 8 kilometers and will give your target plenty of time to dodge. The other drawback to the Umikaze's torpedoes is that they do not have a very large warhead. They will only do a maximum of 6,800 damage per hit, which means that even enemy destroyers will take at least 2 hits to sink. The guns on the Umikaze are weak compared to other ships of its tier. It gets 3 120mm guns, which are accurate and actually do a lot of damage per hit, but they have a slow rate of fire and slow turret traverse and low range when compared to the Samson, the American destroyer. This basically means that the guns will never be a primary weapon, but they can be useful to add a bit of extra damage in the right situation. The guns also have very good firing arcs, which means that you can easily fire a full broadside while still running away effectively, and even more so if you're running towards the enemy, but probably best not to fire guns when heading towards the enemy. The Umikaze is very mobile. Well, I say that it's got a top speed of 33 knots, which is actually a bit on the slow side for a destroyer, but it is very fast for a tier 2 ship. And basically it allows it to get where it's needed in a reasonable time. It turns a bit worse than the Samson, but not significantly so. And like the Samson, it also loses a lot of speed in turns, but it's not as noticeable in the Umikaze as it is in the Samson, because you are really as near to the enemy as you are in the Samson. Another big advantage the Umikaze gets is in its combat capacity. With 10,300 hit points, the Umikaze can take a lot of hits and still keep fighting. It has more hit points than the Aerie at tier 1, and 10,300 actually isn't too far behind the Chester and the Shikuma, the tier 2 cruisers. Particularly when you take into consideration the small size of the Umikaze compared to those cruisers, and the higher maneuverability of the Umikaze, meaning you can dodge shots a lot easier. Ultimately, this makes the Umikaze a very forgiving ship for destroyer players. You know, if they make the mistake, they've got a lot of hit points to absorb damage. When playing the Umikaze, I mostly relied on stealth torpedo attacks, at least in the early stages of the match when I was husbanding my hit points. But you don't really want to fire your torpedoes at your maximum range. This gives your target far too long to dodge. Instead, I'd like to close into around 6 kilometers range, or 6 point something kilometers range, which would reduce the time until my torpedo impacted by 25%, while still remaining outside my detection range of 5.6 kilometers. At tier 2 and 3, most enemy ships don't turn often, so aiming for the grey wedge, I suppose, it's usually sufficient to get a hit or two. Well, probably not usually sufficient, but if you do it 2 or 3 times in a row, you'll probably get a couple of hits. Because of the low damage of the Umikaze's torpedoes, I would usually fire full broadsides at once, all in the same area, and hope for multiple hits in order to actually destroy my enemies instead of just doing this bit of damage. I would occasionally go entire games only doing this form of attack, and basically I would never be spotted and get a few torpedo hits in. And the thing is, you don't actually need to get very many torpedo hits in a ship like the Umikaze to have, done your work for your team. You've only got 10,300 hit points, so if you do get 2 torpedoes on target, you've done more damage to the enemy team than they will ever do to you. So that's kind of should be considered what you should aim for, but most games, even if you play them pretty conservatively, you'll get 3 or 4 torpedoes on target. Or at least I generally did. Where Umikaze gameplay gets interesting is when you are spotted. There were generally 3 reasons this would happen. Firstly, I accidentally got too close to an enemy, like you saw me just happen there, in which case smoke and or speed boost would get me out of trouble fairly quickly. The second situation is when spotted by an enemy destroyer, or not really spotted, when you're just kind of sailing along and an enemy destroyer pops out of nowhere. Because your guns aren't great, destroyer battles will generally be decided with torpedoes. I found the most successful tactic was to wait until the enemy fired their torpedoes. You can tell when they do that by looking for the splashes as the torpedoes into the water, and then turning hard into the enemy. This would usually cause the torpedoes to miss, and even if they anticipated that move, you'd at least be facing bow on into the torpedoes and have a decent chance of threading your way through. And it would also bring you substantially closer to fire your own torpedoes, and shorter range means less time to dodge and more chance of hitting. I'd also like to stagger my launches instead of firing full broadsides. At very close ranges, you're pretty likely to actually get 2 torpedoes out of 2 to hit, and that's enough to sink a destroyer. And staggering them a bit allows you to maintain pressure on your enemy and force them to focus on dodging your torpedoes instead of trying to kill you. Your guns are also worth firing in that situation, if only because destroying the engine of an enemy destroyer is a sure way to make them an easy target for your torpedoes. The third instance is when I think it is worth risking my hit points to destroy an isolated enemy. This is usually at the end of a match when you can kind of see that it wouldn't hurt your team too much to lose some of your hit points. Because of the slow speed of the Umikaze's torpedoes, closer is better, but it's still good to take precautions. Keep your speed up, wriggle your hull around a bit to try and make them difficult to hit, and try to approach when the enemy is distracted or has their guns pointed the wrong way. I don't really have much more to say about the Umikaze. It's a fairly straightforward ship to play, a bit of a one-trick pony as it were. Its only major failing is its low torpedo speeds, which means you can have a low accuracy until you start taking big risks and getting close. But if you maintain situational awareness and keep outside your detection range, you'll get consistently good results in this ship. One thing I haven't mentioned is that the Umikaze is actually very painful stock. And, well, this was the only game I played stock. Because it's a tier 2 ship, you aren't going to be stock for long. Basically what makes the ship bad when in stock is that your torpedoes are very short range. Those 4 I fired off at the enemy destroyer, they won't actually have the range to hit it. And instead of 3 hard-hitting but kind of bad guns, you only get 2 hard-hitting and kind of bad guns. And that, I think 6.8 kilometer range is all they have, which is really not that useful, but it's the longest range attack you have, so you kind of have to use them a bit. And here I'm about to do my first damage of the game. 630 damage with a single hit on that Chikuma there. But it did set a fire, so I got a little bit extra from that, I imagine. And well, it gets sunk by one of my allies up close. See an Airy. Fire off 1 gun at it, 2 guns at it. And they both miss. I really wasn't used to the firing arc of these guns in this game. And anyway, here comes an enemy Chikuma around the corner, and it's actually close enough that my torpedoes are going to be useful. So, set me on fire, I take a lot of damage, but when you're playing short range like this, you kind of have to expect that. Fire some shots, get 1 hit, but my torpedoes are going to be what kills this enemy here for me. Take a lot more damage. My smoke screen's not really effectively hiding me since the enemy are spotting me from so many directions. But I get a devastating strike and sink that Chikuma. And that was probably what got me enough experience to upgrade the torpedoes and guns, well, torpedoes and hull on this ship, and make it actually very potent. Firing a couple of shots off at this enemy Umikaze, I'm getting hits, and as you see, when we hit, they do, well, 1000 damage against an unarmoured ship, 600 against a armoured Chikuma. So they're not actually bad guns in terms of their damage output, it's just slow rate of fire, slow turret traverse, low range. Really just limits the situations that these guns are useful in. And as I say, when you're stock, they're actually the most useful weapons you have. So I'm coming around to try and get an opportunity to get more shots into the Umikaze. And I could probably hit it now, considering they've got fairly high firing arcs. I didn't lead anywhere near enough with those shots. And the enemy's burning quite a bit, and I believe I started one of those fires, so again I'm doing a little bit more damage. I'm getting lucky, I've started a lot of fires, considering the number of hits I've got. Which is all very well for me, I suppose. Now, coming around trying to chase down these enemy destroyers. I believe there are 2 of them there, but we can only see 1 at the moment. Oops. Yep, there's enemy torpedoes, and I was a bit slow on the dodge, and I get destroyed. I was already lost half my health in that engagement with the Chikuma earlier, so it's not too surprising that they were able to sink me that easily. Just a bit of a shame I couldn't, my reactions were so slow there. Now this is the last game I'm going to show you in the Umikaze. It's more typical of how I would usually play this ship. See, it's on Big Race, it's tier 3 game, which is very good because it gives me some battleships to shoot at. And I've gone into the centre, which is where I like to go in my Japanese destroyers. I just prefer the open ocean. I was hoping to get some shots off at that enemy battleship, but didn't quite work out my way, and now one of my allies has fired torpedoes into my back, so I decided I've got enough time to turn in front of them and come back out into the centre here. Now, I just like being in the open ocean because it makes it easier to see where all the enemies are and make sure that none of them are close enough to spot you. I've actually just gotten close enough to that Kawachi that it can see me just for a second there. So presumably the enemy would realise I'm about to fire some torpedoes off at those enemy ships through the channel there. I didn't really expect any of those torpedoes to hit, but it seemed like a decent opportunity, or the best chance I had at this point. And I got spotted thanks to an enemy destroyer coming out of the channel a bit closer to me than I would have liked. But I turned away and pretty soon I'm no longer spotted and I can continue to focus on torpedoes, firing my torpedoes and dodging enemy shellfire. That shellfire couldn't have been aimed, so they must have had a pretty good idea of where I was. Coming back around, fire some torpedoes just into a kind of a mass of shipping back there. And that first broadside of torpedoes I fired, I actually managed to get 2 hits with. So that did a fair bit of damage. I'm really hoping this Wakataka in front of me doesn't run into my torpedoes, but it looks like I managed to get in front of them. Because of the low speed of the torpedoes on the Umikaze, you've got to give a lot of room for friendly ships, because well, your torpedoes are going to be in the water for a long time. Fire my guns at the enemy Wakataka, get a hit, and then I'm just pulling back. I don't really want to close in and decisively engage it when there are so many enemy ships in the vicinity. So instead I pull back to a distance where I'm no longer spotted, and again just fire some more torpedoes into that mass of ships over there. I think the Kawachi's actually run aground, and I think the Chikuma kind of followed it, and they're both... I think the Chikuma's actually blocking the Kawachi from getting out, and the enemy destroyer there is just kind of circling in the region. But unfortunately, with these ships kind of running themselves aground and reversing it, I'm actually having a hard time predicting where they're going to be. But going to give it another go. Now, I should also mention while I'm doing this, I'm also capturing the base, which kind of forces the enemy to come in and engage in the centre. And other than destroyers, no other class of ship really does well in the centre here. It's just there are too many angles for enemies to spot and fire them from, or spot and fire at them from, so it's just hard to defend yourself. Firing a few more torpedoes into those ships, but I decide that the ones off on the west of the map are actually the bigger threat. This South Carolina here and the St. Louis and another St. Louis behind it. Just seeing what's happening behind me, not a lot. We've got good shots here at the South Carolina. So I fire off a broadside. And those torpedoes missed. My last broadside I fired over that way is looking pretty good though. Might hit that Samson. There we go. Managed to get a kill. And those torpedoes are actually looking pretty good, like they're going to hit the Chikuma. But I decided the St. Louis is going to be my next target. I'm going to come around very close to it. But I think I'm going to be fine because it'll be focusing on killing the... Oh, yep, one more hit on the Chikuma there. It's going to be focusing on killing that Tenru, which has just died. So hopefully it won't be ready to fire at me. Fire off my guns because I see it's on very low health. And managed to do enough damage to kill it. Another torpedo hit. That must be one of the... Yeah, that's one of the ones I fired off at South Carolina, so I got a hit on that one. Because of the slow torpedo speeds, I actually kind of lose track of where my torpedoes are, and they just hit eventually later on. Now I know there are some enemy ships through here, so I just fire my torpedoes blind through the gap and hopefully they'll hit something. You never know. Maybe that's St. Louis. But right now I'm just kind of pulling back and just kind of harassing the enemy while my team come back and arrive. The team's got a pretty significant numerical advantage, so we should be able to do alright here. It's just a case of... it's not quite certain enough yet that I'd feel comfortable charging in and doing some close range damage. Thing is, I've done this game so far. I've got 2 kills, got a few shells on target and a lot of torpedoes on target. And I've never actually really seriously been threatened. I've been under long range gunfire briefly, but that wasn't very accurate and none of it hit, so I haven't taken any damage yet. And this is kind of how most of my Umikaze's games kind of were. I mean, unless I was rushed by an enemy destroyer, I'd just kind of hang back, do my damage, just accept that lots of my torpedoes were going to miss, and when they do, just, you know, be thankful for it. So here's that Kawachi from earlier that was run aground, and I've come in pretty close to it, but I'm feeling okay. The enemy's down to 4 ships, and I know I can be past it pretty quickly. I took a big broadside from that St. Louis behind it though. But I put the fire out, and I'm wiggling a bit just to make it a bit harder for me to hit it. I also put on my speed boost so I can get across this channel quicker. But I probably lost about a quarter of my health there. And I'm just hoping those torpedoes run true. And that enemy cruiser's on very low health, but it dies before my shells arrive. So 3 enemy ships left. Just watching the torpedoes there. Oh, spoke too soon. Got 1 hit. So 6,000 or so damage to that enemy battleship. Fire off some shots at the St. Louis here. Those torpedoes aren't ever going to hit. The St. Louis is 7.4 kilometers away and sailing away from me, which means that, you know, the torpedoes just aren't fast enough to reach in time. Decided to fire some shots off at the Kawachi because it's on very low hit points. Fire my torpedoes as well. Oh, it looks like it's firing back at me, but it missed. Fire some more shots and get behind this island. Well, actually it looks like it was flooding. And I just started a fire as well, so hopefully between the 2 of them I'll be able to sink that Kawachi. I thought I'd lost a lot of hit points, so that 1 torpedo hit I got on it must have caused a lot of flooding damage while we couldn't see the enemy ship. And it looks like my torpedoes will miss. And it looks like it's going to live with 400 hit points remaining. Oh, it's using its healing ability, but it just died. Well, it's a shame I didn't get the kill there, but I obviously did a lot of damage to it between the flooding and the fire. That St. Louis I'm going to ignore for now because, well, it's kind of far away and running away from me. While this enemy destroyer is much closer and kind of playing aggressively. Fired torpedoes at me, but they've missed. It's actually in kind of a good spot, that Umikaze, because this Kawachi's going, well, it's isolated itself and trying to charge it down. And the Umikaze's torpedo is going to be very effective at that range. So I think it managed to get 2 hits on it there. I fired my torpedoes in the hope that it would come around the island, but as I fired them we can see that nope, it's going the other way, so that was a bit of a waste, and it does mean that if I get into a short range engagement with this destroyer, I'm not going to have my torpedoes ready to fight it. So enemy Umikaze firing away at the Kawachi. Shells aren't going to do a lot of damage, but it might start a fire. Another torpedo strike, it gets 2 hits, and that Kawachi's lost a lot of health there. I'm firing my guns back at the Umikaze with quite effective, but I have to turn away because those torpedoes are actually on a course where they're a big risk to me. Enemy Umikaze gets in close, fires a point blank torpedo spread into it, and kills the friendly battleship. I leave it on 100 health, but turn my ship a bit to bring my guns to bear. Fire a single shot again, and that is the game.
We've sunk an enemy destroyer.
And yeah, that's the Umikaze. As you saw, it's kind of a one-trick pony. I think it's called that earlier. It's got very good long-range stealth torpedo attacks, but when you're spotted and you get in kind of close range where your torpedoes are just too slow to reach your enemies quickly, your guns don't fire quickly enough to just do the DPM to get you out of trouble, it's actually not that great. It kind of relies on you taking calculated risks and keeping yourself outside of your detection range. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video or found it educational, informative, or whatever, and I'll see you all next time.